Welcome to the Just in Time Cafe's webinar. I'm Tracy O'Rourke, co-founder of the Just in Time Cafe, and I'm going to be your moderator today. And today's webinar is titled, How Lean Six Sigma Problem Solvers Can Hone Their People Skills. Do we need people skills to work in Lean Six Sigma? Yes, that's actually why we're covering it today. And our presenter today is Elizabeth Swan, or I would say the Elizabeth Swan. Let me tell you a little bit about her if you don't know her already, because I've had the pleasure of knowing her for almost 20 years, and she's been my partner in crime for over 8 years. I am lucky to have her. We are co-founders of the Just in Time Cafe, and we share the same passion of building problem-solving muscles all over the world. Elizabeth and I also co-authored the Problem Solvers Toolkit together, and we teach the Lean Six Sigma Leader course together at UC San Diego. You'd think we'd be sick of each other by now, but we are not. And Elizabeth has been a process improvement consultant for over 30 years. So that's a little bit about Elizabeth, a lot to know.
So as Tracy mentioned, we co-founded the Just in Time Cafe in order to cultivate a hub where problem solvers can connect, share, and grow. And you can subscribe. I think a lot of you are subscribed to the Just in Time Cafe, and that will automatically update you on podcasts, webinars, new product offerings, you name it. If you're not aware of our core values, these are huge for Tracy and I. We believe in cultivating community. We're creating an inclusive, positive space where people around the world connect with each other, learn, and grow. That's you guys. We believe in having a trailblazing spirit. You can tell because we just had a technical glitch and we don't care. We have the courage to move forward. I'm kidding, but we have the courage to challenge and inspire each other, to create a constant state of awesomeness. That's Tracy's addition, which I love. And we believe in a rising tide. By lifting each other up, we'll strengthen the global problem-solving community, and that's also huge for us. So with that, let's cover today's objectives and the agenda. Define people skills. We're going to describe how they impact improvement efforts. We're focused on the impact of problem solving, people skills on problem solving. We will list key power skills and then outline ways to measure these hard to grasp people skills, and then list ways to get better at them. So first off, we'll get into a definition. What are people skills? Why do we care about them? How do they help? A few techniques. How do we measure? And we'll end with tips and tricks and Q&A. So now let's dive into people skills. They're also referred to as power skills. And I'm sure my colleague Dorsey Sherman is still busy at the Katakon 7 conference right now, but she reminded me that the term has shifted from soft skills, right? So a lot of us grew up knowing these as soft skills, and then they became people skills, and now they are called power skills. And when she wrote that to me, I thought it makes total sense because these skills are associated with influence. Hard skills, in contrast, require doing. People skills are more focused around ways of being or thinking. People skills are often framed as common sense, having the ability to deal with people, having a positive, flexible attitude. Hard skills are generally things we can see. We can see people coding and graphing or creating process maps. People skills are less tangible, harder to quantify, such as etiquette, getting along with others, listening, engaging in small talk. Sort of classic people skills are, understanding personal bias. That's big right now. Decision-making, empathy, resilience, communication, giving and receiving feedback, mindfulness. So let's dive into why we care about people or power or soft skills. So power skills are critical because they are associated with leadership and long-term success within a company. These are skills that come into play when dealing with others. One of the most common traps we see problem solvers fall into is dealing with the improvement work themselves, sort of doing it all themselves. They may have done great work. They may have discovered the root cause and come up with truly elegant solutions. But then when implementing their ideas, no one's interested in changing the process. So taking it all by yourself, or taking it all on by yourself, is referred to as the lone wolf or hero syndrome. Either way, the impact is predictable. If people have no part in the solution, they are less interested in helping to implement it. This leads to frustration, wasted efforts, requests to leadership to intervene. It's one of the reasons people give up on continuous improvement. If it's not a great experience, why would you want to repeat it? And we hear a lot from problem solvers that their biggest problem is resistance from others. So why aren't we getting better on the people side? So for one thing, there's an issue of investment. Most businesses tie funding for training to return on investment, which means, there are more offerings to become trained in process improvement. We can measure projects completed. We can measure the savings. So without a clear ROI, people's skills often get kind of short shrift. They're not as readily available. Okay, number 2 is measurement. One of the issues with people skills is they can seem, amorphous, hard to measure. Hard skills are more defined and they're easier to measure. When people are coding and mapping and graphing, there's tangible results. Lean Six Sigma problem solvers spend lots of time learning definable skills. They get certificates that indicate their level of ability, like a yellow belt, the green belt, the black belt. Training in people skills is available, but certifications and badges aren't as recognized. There aren't these levels. And lastly, practice. One of the issues is that in contrast to people skills, when measuring hard skills, problem solvers can practice on their own. When mastering hard skills, they can practice on their own. And they can show others their A3. They can work on a process map and then show somebody what they came up with, or they can build a histogram, again, get some feedback on it. So they can get specific feedback and then improve. So it's relatively straightforward to learn continuous improvement techniques. The so-called hard stuff is often easier than the softer stuff. So let's get into problem solving and coaching problem solvers. So in this webinar, we're focused on both the problem solvers and the people trying to lead the problem solvers. If you're a coach, you might want to provide people with more guidance for the influence side of process improvement. Your title could be a coach, a lean sensei, a master black belt, a green belt, or you may have no official title. And you just know that people need help. So let's check on the roles that people are playing. We're going to do a poll now, our first poll with you guys. What is your role in terms of people skills? So either you are working to build your own skill set, or you are coaching others to build their skill set, or you're doing both.
All right. 78% people, 21 people say they are doing both, followed by I'm working to build my own skill set, and then I'm coaching others. So definitely both, which is great, because that's what we're learning at Kotakon 7 too, aren't we? That you want to be a coach and you want to coach, and you're going to grow in both ways.
Yeah, you don't stop learning these things yourself just because you're trying to teach them to other people. In fact, you're a better teacher if you are a learner. A couple different people skill techniques that are helpful, and how we use them. And then we're going to cover, why they're helpful. And then we're going to give you guidance on how to measure people skills. So let's dive into those. The first one is the concept of advocacy. So advocacy is defined as the act of pleading for, supporting, or recommending. It's what's called active espousal. Whereas inquiry is defined as seeking or a request for truth, information, or knowledge. And inquiry is the process of asking about or investigating something in order to find out more about it. Edgar Schein, in his book, Humble Inquiry, a phenomenal book, we'll reference that again later, makes the point that culturally in the US, we value advocacy. In particular, we often assume that in order to be considered smart and powerful, we should be advocating our positions, which means telling others what we think. But people are often put off by others telling us what they think, or what they think we should do, or what they think is right. Michael Bungay-Stanier, the author of The Coaching Habit, another wonderful resource. I know a lot of you have that. We'll reference that again. He's got a name for this persona. He calls it the advice monster. And his latest book addresses that advice monster. So anyone here with an older sibling probably has heard the words, you know what you should do, for most of your lives. Siblings can be annoying, but in the workplace, the results are dangerous. So people at every level benefit from engaging in inquiry. Processes are way too complex. Technology moves way too fast for one person to have all the knowledge. So it's especially dangerous in arenas like healthcare processes where patients' lives are at stake. We've all heard stories of operations being performed on the wrong limb because nobody asked a critical question at a critical moment. And all organizations are interdependent. You need an atmosphere where it's okay to point out problems and speak up. And if you're mentoring others, you want to guide them in how to build this kind of a culture. A quote I like from Edgar Schein: "We must become better at asking and do less telling in a culture that overvalues telling." We'll discuss measuring people skills in a bit, but here's an example of where a study measured inquiry versus advocacy. They listened to 300 hours. So this takes a lot of time, or it took a lot of time, 300 hours of organizational meetings. And they found that 95% of the meetings was spent in advocacy. That means there's not much discovery going on. It also means that people are missing opportunities to uncover issues and build relationships. So that is a fairly stark measurement. So we've got some other measures. Let's look at kind of one of the reasons for this. And this one, these are stats that'll help us understand this. Okay, this first one is we process words at 600 words per minute, right? So that's one stat. Another stat, we speak at 150 words per minute. And so the question is, what are we doing with this excess capacity? We have conversations in our head. We're figuring out what we want to say next. The technique is inquiry, but once you ask a question, you have to listen. That's not the end of it. And have you ever dealt with a person who they don't wait for you to finish answering one question before they're asking another one? Whatever is going on, it's sparking more questions, but you don't even have a chance to answer them. Or people kind of give you cues to hurry up with your answer. Have you ever talked to somebody and while you're answering them, they're going, yeah. They probably have something to say. They've been forming it in their head while you've been talking. They've been using that extra capacity, that 450 words per minute excess capacity to figure out what they're going to say. And a colleague of mine has said, and I posted this recently, the opposite of talking isn't listening, it's waiting to talk. And my colleague, Katie Anderson, talks about the clarity pause, taking that moment. But all these are hard to do. Our instincts are to add value, right? If I'm not adding value, what's going on here? So the challenge is to use that 450 words per minute in a positive way, right? To listen. So these are some examples of how to flip advocacy into inquiry. It requires you to take a beat before someone else, before you start talking. It means you've got to stop, check if you're asking or telling. If you're telling, see if you can turn it into inquiry. So let's do the first one. Looks like people are making mistakes on the application. So how would we flip that? question would be, do you see any problems happening with the application? Next one, customers are complaining and this department has to change. Telling. If we flip that, do you see any opportunities for improvement in the current process? Next one, please review these edits I made to the application. Flip that, would you make any edits to the application? Before you actually make your own edits. Next one, last one, let me describe what we've decided to change. Becomes, what would you propose as changes? So just think, taking that beat, what am I about to offer? Is there a way to solicit from the other person before I put down what I've got? I know what I've got to offer, but I have an opportunity to find out what would they offer. And this is those moments that we lose in the heat of the moment, in trying to get things done quickly, in trying to get our ideas out. But we lose a lot. We lose not just the information the other person might have given us, because there's ideas that are sitting out there waiting to be tapped, but also to form that relationship with that person that makes them feel valued, that you're actually care about what they have to offer. So there's a danger with questions. They're not all equal. Let's look at this idea of fake inquiry. So fake questions are advocacy disguised as inquiry. If you want to know what the team wants for lunch, you might ask, hey, what do you think of ordering pizza? You're not really asking what they want. You're advocating for pizza. So fake questions often start with, have you thought about, what about, have you considered? If you really want to put things out there, list them as options. Think about how often you do this. Have you considered switching vendors? Great. That means, you're putting forth a solution. You're not really asking. Does my idea make sense? Let's really put somebody on the spot. What do you think of automating it? Again, you're just proposing a solution. Why didn't you consider AI? Yeah, those why questions are not helpful. So be aware of, just because it's a question mark doesn't mean it's a valuable question. It might be what we call fake inquiry. A lot of things happen when problem solvers and coaches switch from advocacy to inquiry. They give other people a say in process change. They let other people know they value their process knowledge. They improve communications between themselves and stakeholders, colleagues and process participants. By asking and listening, they build those critical relationships that enable change. Questions also educate the coach. I heard this again, a quote at Katakon, Tracy and I were attending this week. When you're coaching, the student is the teacher. And that's really a cause for pause. You are learning. You are trying to understand the issues, and the learner is teaching you. It's also true for situations like process walks, where problem solvers are trying to understand what's going on in the process. Team leads often lack what we call positional power. That means they rely on relationships to get things done. A leadership guest that Tracy and I had on the Just-in-Time Cafe podcast, a guy named Gary Peterson. He was in charge of manufacturing at a plant out in Utah. He includes this in his hiring process, which is kind of fascinating. So after being selected as a potential hiree, right, you're not in yet, you get a 3-month internship. And in that time, you have to show that you can get others to work with you. So an intern literally has zero authority. So they have to build relationships. That means they have to practice inquiry. And that is showing, he knows that if the person has that ability, if they can do it in that lowest of low positions, then they've got promise. And that's what he's discovered makes the biggest difference for new hires, if they have the ability to form those relationships. So those are huge. This is a pile of suggestions. This is a classic corporate phenomenon where leadership creates a suggestion box. People submit ideas, suggestions, and they never hear a thing. And it has the opposite impact. People feel completely ignored. And the same thing can happen during the problem solving process. Once you ask for input, or once a problem solver asks for input, you have to let people know that you've heard them. You don't have to use every idea, but problem solvers have to let other people know that they've heard them. And you get a lot of options for this. Just list a really simple technique. List what they said somewhere. If you're in a room and you've got a flip chart, put it on a flip chart. If you're online in a mural board, put it on a mural board, or put it in a Zoom minutes. In the meeting minutes, on a storyboard. Put them on a fishbone diagram. People have suspicions of what's going wrong. There's a perfect classic tool for it. So when people see their ideas in writing, then they feel heard, which is great. Dion said the internship hire experience sounds intriguing. However, how would that be implemented for C-suite positions where they are called upon to make decisions from the beginning? Yeah, there's definitely different roles people are playing. In your role in a C-suite might be you've been given authority to make key decisions on this, but I would still say you're probably going to have to use your powers of inquiry to make the best decisions. But what you're pointing out is a lot of times people are promoted because they make fast decisions, but it's just the reality of modern businesses. You can't be in all places at one time. You've got to have that network, especially as a leader, especially in the C-suite, to be able to make the right decisions or push them to the right position. But you're right, the new hire is not necessarily. Actually, I have to ask Gary if he used it for C-suite position. That's a really good point. Okay, so let's come to coaching problem solvers on inquiry. We'll come back to this role of coach or mentor. How can you help problem solvers master the art of inquiry? Here are some questions you can ask. This is not a definitive list, but it helps open the door. And, as a coach, you're always practicing inquiry. The idea is to open the door for them to practice it too. The last two come from The Coaching Habit, the book I mentioned by Michael Funjay Stanier. And we'll come back to him. But this one, what is your biggest challenge? This one's a revelation to me. I've been coaching. I've been at this for over 30 years. And, I have good questions. I'm a good coach. But once I read this book, I thought, let me try out some of his questions. And this one appealed to me. What's your biggest challenge? So at the end of the call, we've talked about everything. We've covered the project. I'd say, what's your biggest challenge? And every single time, something completely new came up. And I was astounded. It happened again and again and again. And so that just became one of my standard questions for everything. I use it all the time. It is a huge eye-opener. Another one that came up during the Katakon conference was, and what else? And this one, people pointed out, it's a great way to get to the underlying issues, get past the kind of obvious or things people feel comfortable saying, and maybe get down to stuff that's not as obvious or detail, because people keep asking it, and what else, and what else, and what else, and what else, until there's nothing else. But these are two great questions to get at the less obvious, that's stuff below the surface. So those are good. So what do you see as the greatest challenge to inquiry? And obviously there's a limited list here, but I'm curious to see what people are experiencing. And then we can find out things that we didn't ask in the process. How about you, Tracy? What do you see as the biggest challenge to inquiry?
Not enough practice. And so the questions aren't very good, right? So kind of what the fake questions, I start to see a lot of the fake questions come up because they're trying to use inquiry, but they're not very good at it yet. So that's the one I would say that I would see the most is they really do want to, and they try, but they're not so great at it at first. So the first one is actually, it looks like there's a tie, not knowing what to ask and being too busy for inquiry, not valuing it. So, and I think one feeds the other. You don't know what to ask. So you're like, okay, well, I'm too busy to think about it. So I'm just moving on. And then followed by asking the right questions, but failing to listen. And then belief that telling is essential to authority. So the last one is losing sight of the need to interact.
Too busy, not valuing it. That, I think, is probably the scourge that we're dealing with, and having to build it as a practice. Jessica says, I think sometimes leaders don't know what to do with what they find out. Yeah, that's fair enough. I've got this information. What do I do with it?
I would also say too that sometimes leaders feel like they need to know everything, and they're worried that when they give up control, which is what you're doing when you ask a question, they're not going to have an answer for what comes back at them. So they're afraid.
Yeah, fear is definitely part of this. Yeah, and the culture obviously is either promoting or not promoting inquiry on some level.
We have a comment too, quickly, Elizabeth, in the question: how would inquiry work when every leader already has a solution in mind? That's when we get the fake questions. Have you thought about automation? Have you thought about doing it my way?
Yeah, I mean, it much depends on leadership, and leaders can sway entire organizations. If you've got someone that doesn't value it and has all the answers, it's a tough thing to deal with. I've been there, and what I try to do myself is model the behavior that I would like to see. So if I'm in meetings, I'm really careful about asking people to give input. I give credit. People gave ideas and we're going to use them. I'll always call out, where did that idea come from? And make sure people know that by offering up and by having that dialogue, we got superior solutions. So I think the best you can do is model the best behavior. And these two examples come from my fabulous colleague, Dorsey Sherman. She wrote an article about this. She's a professional coach, and she's put time into how to measure people's skills. That's what she's doing. So one thing you can measure is who's doing all the talking. So as organizations work to improve their corporate culture and increase collaboration, any kind of meeting is an opportunity, team meeting, staff meeting. In this organization, the issue was a few people dominating the staff meetings. This one is the issue of people dominating meetings, which I'm sure is familiar to some of you people. In this case, it caused a lot of turmoil and a lot of meeting after the meeting conversations, which used to take place around a water cooler, which is kind of a mythical thing at this point. But to deal with this, the leader let the staff know first he wanted equal participation. So that was the goal. And then to measure this and hold himself accountable, he created a drawing of everyone in the room. All right, so he listed everyone around the table. So when one person spoke, he drew a line from the speaker to who was being spoken to. And if the person being spoken to responded, he drew a line back to the speaker. And then after the meeting, he showed the group the picture. So in the meeting of 10 people, 4 people did 80% of the talking. Those are the culprits. So they kept doing this, and people became much more aware of who was being invited into the conversation, and participation became more equal. And this is not high tech. Anyone can do it, but you need to designate a person to capture this kind of information. One concept, this is from Dion, one concept that I really appreciate is the idea of making oneself replaceable. That is teaching and helping others to assume one's current role. That is a wonderful, wonderful point. It's hard for people. That's scary. Back to Tracy's discussion of the fear involved. If I'm replaceable, am I going to be replaced? So, but that is a beautiful way to operate, and definitely helps people. It grows people. It creates a great workplace, a workplace people want to be in. And then once again, you're modeling. If you're doing it, other people feel free to do that too. Then you have basically an incredibly well-trained workplace with a really growing culture. So thanks for that example, Tian. Yes, people get replaced. Okay, here's another nice example from Dorsey. This is measuring inquiry, right? We've talked a lot about it. So how many questions are people asking? So coaches are often in a leadership role, and although they are often trained to ask, It's not a habit. As we discussed, we often associate leadership with knowing all the answers, making quick decisions. All right, we talked about that. I think you just brought that up in the chat. And that might be the reason we've risen through the ranks, right? And that makes it tough to change. We've been rewarded for this kind of behavior. This example also comes from Dorsey. It's a low tech once again. So just using tick marks on Post-it notes. The goal was to find out how often problems were presented to a plant manager. So turns out staff were coming to his office about 5 to 7 times a day with problems. Okay, so next we want to see how often the response to the problem was a question. Initially, none. And then how often the manager offered a solution. So when they started, the solutions were offered 100% of the time. So as you've heard, what gets measured gets managed. So within a month of questions, the questions started to replace solutions. So that means that people started owning the problem solving, not the manager, because that's self-reinforcing. You keep bringing problems, manager keeps solving it, they're just going to keep doing that. I think Richard Sheridan has a fabulous story about this too, where he took his daughter to work one day, and she sat there, and she was tiny. I think she was like, 5 or 6. And she, at the end of the day, he said, what did you think? I mean, he had to give her crayon stuff to do. He's obviously a busy guy. He was running the operation. And she said, well, you're very, very important man. And he said, what makes you think that? And he said, well, nobody makes any decisions without checking with you first. And he was so depressed. He was like, oh my God, I'm a terrible leader. These are just great ways to get these soft skills, to find out how you're handling inquiry.
I just thought that was the funniest story ever, that your kids somehow, they just see all that insight. You are very important around here because nobody can make a decision without you.
Nobody can do anything without you. Like, oh my God.
That's a learning moment. Like, yeah. Great.
And things don't happen quickly when you are the bottleneck, right? If all decisions go through you, man, that is a slow response operation. Okay, so another way to build people skills is to find a network of allies. So an ally is a person, a group, or a nation that is associated with another or others for some common cause or purpose. Maybe that purpose is tied to organizational mission. Maybe it's a broader purpose of building a problem-solving culture, improving governments, making the world a better place. Could be as narrowly defined as benefiting from the process fixes a problem solver is working on. So why do we care about building this network of allies? So your own ideas are probably great, but process improvement benefits when it's done with other people. That's why it's often done in teams. But beyond the team, there are often others who have dealt with similar issues. We say steal shamelessly when it comes to improvement ideas. How do we find out if someone else has already tackled this problem? We need to network. And you may have a good idea, but talking it out with another person helps you build and improve the idea. Also, people outside the team may have no vested interest, so they can be a pair of fresh eyes. All right, so building informal partnerships. So who might have mutual interests? Other problem solvers, key stakeholders, other team leads, people in similar lines of business, people from other lines of business, ex-colleagues, problem solvers in other industries, people with similar positions in the organization, but within other product or service lines. For the women in this group, there's the Women in Lean, our table. That's a huge network of problem solvers. So one thing that we see work really well when problem solvers talk to other problem solvers, and these can be team leads, green belts, colleagues running 5S's, there's a great network to build and sustain. And people appreciate being asked for help, right? It's an opportunity to add value, right? We'd like to add value. It means that they feel comfortable now asking us for help when they need it. And then you can add value. So it's a great cycle, right? It's a really good thing to build. What kinds of questions? And this is, let me just see what Sunitha said. We practice listening so that we can help our colleagues to explore their thinking. Pause and silence are difficult yet essential practices in inquiry-based listening. That's really nice. Yeah, pause and silence, which are not also normally part of our culture and can feel awkward. But I think those are essential, as you say, for really allowing that person to even hear themselves think, as you say. That's nice. Thanks, Sunitha. Always thoughtful. Coaching problem solvers. So coming back to your role as a coach, for those of you in that position, here are some good questions to help draw out problem solvers, help them consider whether or not they have a good network. And if they don't, what's stopping them? So it's also a good idea to cultivate a network of critics. A critic is defined as someone who judges, evaluates, criticizes. Except for when they're describing movies, the word critic doesn't have good connotation. So why would we need a whole club of them? Why do we need critics? As I mentioned, I've got older sisters, so I didn't start out in life appreciating criticism. It's definitely not as much fun as getting compliments. But at some point you realize you need an honest opinion. My sisters were great when it came to clothes shopping, hearing, that dress does nothing for you. Saved me money and worse. So the same goes for problem solvers. Inviting dissent helps them discover divergent opinions. It helps foster diversity of thought. It leads to options when problem solving. The idea is to share the good, the bad, and the ugly in neutral territory so you or the problem solvers can build better ideas. Okay, so let's come back to this idea that was given to us from the 50s that no idea is a bad idea. So if you grew up with the rules of brainstorming, what's interesting is that they're not all great rules. At least this one is not, that all ideas are good ideas. So a little history, Alex Osborne coined the word in 1948. And the idea was to foster ideas in the absence of criticism and negative feedback. But there's been a lot of these studies, but as far back as 58, so pretty soon after, empirical tests refuted the effectiveness of this particular rule. So in 2003, UC Berkeley study showed that the addition of debate conditions produced better ideas. So this idea of avoiding hurt feelings is less effective. It turns out that dissent fosters creativity. But the reality is processes are increasingly specialized and we need groups to solve most issues, right? Talking back to the idea of the C-suite person having to make all the decisions, you can't. You need others. Things are too interconnected, too complex. So that's where critics come in. So this is a great story about the impact of criticism and what happens without it. This came, if you're interested, this is a New Yorker article, Brainstorming Groupthink by Jonah Lehrer. Most of you probably know about the Pixar movie studios here in the US. They had a string of 12 hits. So 12 hits in a row is unprecedented. And the internal process at Pixar required, I don't know if they're still doing it, each story has to be critiqued 6 or 7 times. All right, that's a lot. And they said it was brutal, but they never relented. They did that for every single movie. You had to be raked over the coals by your colleagues. So Andrew Stanton of Pixar, he was the lead writer for Toy Story trilogy, Finding Nemo, WALL-E, hugely successful movies. Then Disney hired him to direct John Carter. It's an action film. Not sure if you saw it. It costs anywhere between $250 to $307 million to produce it. And Disney took a $200 million loss. And the film has served somewhat of a cautionary tale in the industry. There are most likely lots of root causes, but one thing we know about it is that unlike all the other Pixar hits, there were no rounds of critiques for this film. So taking that back into the realm of problem solving, the same thing happens. People are busy, or they're polite, or they're afraid to offer criticism. If problem solvers don't ask, they won't get the benefit of constructive criticism. It has to become a habit. And then others have to see criticism as welcome. Otherwise, problem solvers lose the opportunity to build better solutions. So that's a great story. And here we have a tool for you guys. So to help with finding allies and critics, we created a template that you can use, free, available on the website. Tracy's going to give you a link in a little bit. We'll provide you with that, a link to all the templates, whatever you want to use. But it starts with a series of questions, and these help you find allies or critics. And these might be the same people. I've worked with folks, I know sometimes they had the same people in their groups. Once you found your network of critics and allies, the second half of the template provides you these questions. So let's look at a few of these. One of them is, have you seen the problem elsewhere? Do you know others who've dealt with it? What have you seen work? Are there aspects people tend to forget to address? What do you think about my approach? Once again, now you're starting to trend into critic territory. So critics, you want to say, use your critical eye. What am I not seeing? Name 5 things about this that might not work. Now, giving people that target, like 5 things, you got to come up with 5 things. That's actually a great challenge to give people. Who might lose if we make this? Okay, so those are 2 things you can use. So if you are playing the role of coach, here's some good questions to uncover roadblocks that problem solvers have in terms of soliciting honest feedback. Takes practice. The goal is to turn it into a habit. So if people see you open to feedback, then you'll get more. It might take some toughening of the skin. That whole thing, feedback is a gift. We used to say that with gritted teeth, and sometimes say it was a gift, but we would like to re-gift it. But getting used to it, once you start seeing it as the advantage that it is, it becomes, it gets easier over time. And sometimes people fall in love with their own ideas, and it's really hard to let go of them. So we have to be willing to drop them, or at least be open to modification. A question I've got for you guys. So this is, what techniques do you see helping most in terms of improving people skills? Enlisting the help of both the allies and the critics. Yes, Katie, I like that. Fake inquiry, watching out for fake inquiry. A good one. Thanks, Dion. Amy being good role models. Yes, really help. Help problem solvers get in the habit of asking more than telling. Beware that advice monster. Help them assess their listening skills. Are they staying in the present or planning their next words? Check in with problem solvers to see if they're letting people know they've been heard. Continuous improvement's easier with allies. You can help problem solvers build their network. Are problem solvers sensitive to criticism? Help them get comfortable seeking feedback. All of this builds relationships. Those are key to success. Relationships are key to building a problem-solving culture. Treat it as an education and always be learning. Asking instead of telling. Yeah. Use of a second coach. Thank you. Second coach is huge. And that is, some people think it's a luxury. I feel like that is such an essential. Find someone to help you be a better coach. Use role model behaviors. Thank you, Wilson. Jennifer, make light conversation. Small talk helps build relationships. It really does. Just getting to know a person, caring about them is part of building that relationship. So that's a really great point. Christine, frame your critique as overall improvement through group sourcing. That's cool. Frame it as overall improvement. All right. And the group is the source. I like that. So treat the group as the source. Okay, cool. Larry said, learning to ask better questions more frequently. A practice I'm trying to adopt. Jot down some questions prior to a meeting. Be prepared. That's really nice. Think about your questions ahead of time. That is excellent advice. You really want to come in there with having thought through who's this person, what are they dealing with, and then there's some of the standard ones that we've pulled from the coaching habit and things like that. But either way, really nice point. Thank you, Larry. Okay, so coming back to some of the resources, I want to show you the books I've been referencing and some that I have not. Edgar Schein, probably anything he's written. Humble Inquiry, Humble Leadership, phenomenal book, great case studies. He's talking about how it works, where it works, in places you wouldn't expect, like the military, where it seems like, no, that's the infinite in terms of having to be in a hierarchical position and know the answer. Coaching Habit, we've talked about in great length today. And the other one is Ask More by Frank Sesno. He's a journalist. So this is all walks of life, but he includes problem solving or even asking your parents, questions to understand them better.
That really hit me hard on that book. Ask More, asking questions of parents that are getting older.
Yeah, I've been doing some regular interviews of my mom for that reason. And Jennifer says, be empathetic, demonstrate that you understand someone's emotions when you see something from their perspective. The emotional piece is huge. We tend to downplay them in corporations, but at our peril. They're there for everyone. They're the reason we do things or don't do things, or do things willingly or not. So be empathetic, and understanding emotions is huge. Okay, while you guys think of questions, call to action, what we're going to do is send out links to you guys. Here's one here. If you just go to jitcafe.com, you can get links to downloadables, webinars you haven't seen, templates, the podcast. So just go there. That's going to be an easy one. But then download that template, start enlisting some allies and critics, start listening, stop waiting to talk. Then if you're really daring and you want to have some fun, I'm running a workshop, how to apply improv to lean problem solving. I was on stage for 5 years, which fundamentally, I was back in the 90s with Improv Boston. It fundamentally altered my career. It really jump-started my career as a process improvement consultant. I figured if I could be on stage and have no idea what's going on, then I could do anything. But this is a 2.5-hour workshop, and we'll just get at the tenets of improv that really help problem solvers, because improv is problem solving on stage. So 2.5 hours. I highly recommend it. It's going to be great, fun, interactive, hands-on, and learning the tenets of improv that help us be better problem solvers. Next one is a guest webinar coming up, and that's on April 1st. So this one is another interactive session. This isn't a webinar, but it'll be put on like a webinar, but you guys will be on, you can participate. And this one is about just advanced techniques in mural. It includes running a simulation. You'll be involved in one that, shows batching versus single piece flow, visual huddle boards. And there's another one. Oh yeah, project delivery. This is great. Peter is a pro, and he comes to us from Scotland, so he's got a fun accent. So come to that one.
Yeah, he gave us a preview of some of the work you did in mural, and I was like, wow.
Astounding. Yeah, astounding. He is a power mural user. Then let's see, lastly, I mentioned our podcast. Our latest one is an interview with Jeff Liker, who just produced the newest version of the Toyota Way, which is great. And he sort of talks about why he did that, and how kids are very humbling in their criticism. Talk about a critics club. He's got one with both of his children, but has done great work. Tracy, did you see any questions?
I didn't see any. I guess people got their questions out throughout the webinar.
So we'll send you a list of the links we mentioned today. Another one is a Lean Six Sigma Leader course that Tracy and I are teaching, and that starts April 13th. And that is, Tracy, you want to describe that briefly?
Sure. The Lean Six Sigma Leader course it's about 12-week course. It covers leader standard work, what you need to do as a leader or should be doing, or reflections on your leadership. It also talks about the Shingo model and the 4 areas to focus on to build a continuous improvement culture. And it's really exciting and fun. And Elizabeth and I teachers, if you want to come to that.
Anyway, thank you so much for joining today. You guys have been hugely interactive and fun and had some great ideas. So we learned from you, as we always do. And we'll see you in a couple more weeks, hopefully.
Bye, everyone.